From Providence, Rhode Island, welcome to the MCU Diaries, a podcast dedicated to the storycraft and meaning behind Marvel. No homework, no timelines, just story. Now, let's break down Earth's mightiest heroes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MCU Diaries. My name is Blake, and today we're talking about Sadie Sink, Jean Grey, the Punisher, and why Spider-Man Brand New Day might be way more important to Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars than it looks on the surface. I was ready to treat the Sadie Sink, Jean Grey, rumor, leak, whatever you want to call it, as just like a casting news dump. It was a cool idea, and I would say a big X-Men tease for what's coming after Doomsday. Perhaps even just a nice little mutant saga breadcrumb. But the Punisher One Last Kill changed how I see the whole inclusion of Jean Grey. Because now I think Jean, if that is who Sadie Sink is really playing, could break Spider-Man Brand New Day wide open in what I think is probably the best possible story way. Because she would add not only mutants to Spider-Man's story, which in and of itself is really cool, but she would expose the wounds underneath Spider-Man and Frank Castle, Bruce Banner, and really maybe the whole MCU before Doom gets here. Of course, if you're listening to this podcast on your podcast app, you can find it on YouTube as well. And if you want to read more about it, just go to maryandblake.com where you can see exactly what I'm talking about. All right, let's get into it. So, full spoiler warning here for The Punisher One Last Kill, Daredevil, Born Again Season 2, Spider-Man No Way Home, and the leaked or rumored material around the new Spider-Man Brand New Day trailer, which is soon to be coming. And that last part really matters. Marvel has not officially said yet that Sadie Sink is Jean Grey. So we are just treating this as a story possibility. But if the leak is right, then Brand New Day is going to do something much more interesting than just, hey, look at all these cameos. Because Jean Grey's value here goes beyond pointing at the X-Men and saying, hey, everybody, mutants are coming, right? The better version is this. Jean Grey turns power into moral interior pressure. She can get inside the place that these characters spend their entire lives trying to protect. Frank's grief, Bruce's control, Peter's fear, and maybe the MCU's biggest question before Doomsday, which is, what do you do with dangerous power before someone like Doom decides the answer for everybody? And that is the craft tool for this episode, something that we like to call the moral X-ray. A moral X-ray is a character or force that sees beneath behavior and exposes the wound driving the action. It takes the thing a character does and asks what they need to do it. Frank Castle kills. Bruce Banner tries to control the Hulk. Peter Parker saves people. Those are actions. Jean Grey, at least as a telepath, can reach the need underneath that action. Why can Frank not stop killing? Why does Bruce need the Hulk locked behind a device? Why does Peter keep saving people after the world took Peter Parker away from him? And that's where this gets good, because Spider-Man Brand New Day already had enough stuff. Spider-Man, Hulk, Punisher, the Department of Damage Control, maybe the Hand, maybe Scorpion, maybe Tombstone, maybe Jackal, and yes, even maybe Jean Grey. That can turn into story soup real fast. But a crowded story works when every piece pressures the same wound. And that is what Jean can do. let's start with Frank Castle, because the Punisher One Last Kill does a very specific thing with him. Frank has finished the war he thought would end the pain. The Nikusi are gone. The kill wall is coming down. His targets are dead. The mission on paper is complete. And then Frank has nothing. And that is the part I keep coming back to. The revenge ends. The grief does not. So he dissociates, he hallucinates, he sees Curtis, he sees Karen Page, he sees his family, he goes to the cemetery, he leaves the key to his weapons at his wife's grave, like he's trying to hand the violence back to the dead. And then he nearly pulls the trigger on himself. That's not Frank in battle. That is Frank after battle. That is Frank discovering the worst possible answer to his entire life. The mission didn't save him. It just kept him busy. And there is a line in the special from the hallucinated Karen Page that gets right to the nerve. You're not a victim. You chose it. That line is brutal because Frank hates the word victim. He rejects it. He spits it back at people. But that special keeps asking whether Frank has used that rejection as permission to become nothing except the Punisher. And then Karen says something even worse. I failed your family, and now you're failing the city. Obviously, Karen is not literally standing there. That is Frank putting the accusation in her mouth, because part of him knows that it's true. He left Matt and Karen to fight Fisk while he chased the last branch of his old war. He finished his revenge while New York burned. And that, for him, is the wound. Frank's violence is grief, but in just wearing really, really heavy body armor, I suppose. And then the Brand New Day theory comes in and asks a wild question. What if Jean Grey, as Sadie Sink, has already touched that wound? And I'm going to be careful with what I'm saying here, because I'm not saying that the Punisher special definitely intended Jean Grey to be inside Frank's visions. The cleaner read is just that it's trauma, right? The special works absolutely perfect as just trauma. Frank is broken. He's exhausted, isolated, and coming down from another massacre. But the theory that Jean participated in this is useful because it points to a real story function. If Jean is a telepath in Brand New Day, and if the leaked trailer material is pointing toward mind-hopping as an invisible threat, then Frank becomes the most dangerous mind in New York to stumble into. Imagine Jean searching for help, or trying to escape, or jumping from mind to mind, and then finding Frank Castle. What does she find? A man who has turned grief into basically his job. A man who is so full of pain that pain has become his operating system. A man who is useful because he is already a weapon, and he's terrifying because he knows it. So if Jean gives Frank a push away from that final trigger, she is not saving him with comfort. She is making him necessary again. And that is messy. That is morally ugly. And for me, that's probably the most interesting part of it. Because now Frank's role in Spider-Man Brand New Day changes. He is not only the hard R vigilante standing next to the PG-13 superhero. Frank becomes the guy Jean may understand better than anyone wants her to. Peter can look at Frank and say, "Do not kill." Frank can shrug that off. He's heard that speech. He's heard it from Matt. Nothing new there. He's even heard it from Karen. He's heard it from every person who still believes that line, "Do not kill," matters. But Jean, though, Jean can hit Frank from a different direction. She does not have to argue with the method first. She can see his wound first, and that is a problem for Frank, because Frank's whole persona depends on turning pain into certainty. Bad people die. Threats get removed. The mission continues. And Jean takes that clean line and makes it human again. She can force Frank to confront the possibility that his punishment is grief, refusing to heal. That does not excuse him. It just makes him harder to simplify. And that's exactly why what a good crossover can do to characters and what it should do to characters. Now, let's put Peter next to all of this. After No Way Home, Peter Parker has lost everything that made him Spider-Man at all and made Spider-Man livable in the first place. MJ doesn't remember him. Ned doesn't remember him. Happy doesn't remember him. The Avengers may remember Spider-Man, but the kid underneath is gone from their lives completely. He has the suit, he has the responsibility, he has the rent. Great combo, love that for him. But emotionally, Peter is in the most dangerous place he's ever been, because Spider-Man is no longer one part of his life. Spider-Man is the life. And that's why Frank matters here, because Frank is what happens when the mission eats the person inside. Frank, is not wearing a mask, but the Punisher identity has done the same job. It has swallowed Frank Castle whole. So when Frank looks at Peter, he is looking at a younger man standing at the edge of the same cliff. Keep doing this long enough, lose enough people, get tired enough, then one day the mask stops coming off. And this is why Jean makes the triangle even better. Peter and Frank already give us the outer moral conflict. Peter says mercy. Frank says punishment. Cool. That's a classic baked-in argument. And that is part of their comic DNA. But Jean adds the interior conflict. She is the one who can ask what mercy costs when you can feel the damage inside the person you are trying to save. She can also ask what punishment costs when you can feel the person underneath the threat. Because Peter's greatest strength is also his greatest burden in this case. He sees people as people, even when they're dangerous, even when they hurt him, even when saving them costs him. Jean can make that gift unbearable because she can show him the pain in the room with no filter. Peter has always had his spider sense. Brand New Day may give him something worse. Emotional sense. And then there's Bruce Banner. And this is where the whole thing starts to feel like one movie instead of a pile of announcements. The leaked trailer descriptions all seem to circle the same idea. Mutation, body change, repression, and an inhibitor device. Bruce has a device that keeps him in human form. Peter may be dealing with some kind of physical mutation, maybe organic webbing, or a new stage of his body changing. And Jean, if the leak is right, can get inside Bruce's mind and bring out the Savage Hulk. That's huge because Bruce's current status in the MCU has always had a strange little problem. Professor Hulk looks like Resolution. He talks like Resolution. He acts like the guy who figured it out. But dramatically, that's dangerous because the old Hulk conflict got solved off screen. That rage was handled. The monster was integrated. And thus the wound was managed. Okay, sure. But what happens if Jean reveals that Bruce did not heal the Hulk? What if he organized the Hulk? What if he built a system that keeps the dangerous part quiet? That is totally a different story. There is apparently a line where Bruce asks Peter how you determine which parts of nature are good and which parts are bad. And that line is doing a lot of work here because Bruce is saying it to Peter, but it applies to Bruce too. What part of you gets to stay? What part gets suppressed? What part gets called dangerous? And what part gets called a mutation? Who gets to decide all this? That is how the Hulk, Spider-Man, Jean Grey, and the Department of Damage Control all start belonging to the same argument. The DODC sees power as a control problem. Bruce sees Hulk as a control problem. Frank sees criminals as a control problem. Peter sees danger as a rescue problem. And Jean can turn all of that into a person problem. And that is the movie I want. Because the real villainous energy here may be classification, really. And yes, that does sound very boring until you put it into a superhero movie and realize it's actually quite terrifying. The second someone gets labeled as a threat, everything changes. Now you can hunt them, hold them, experiment on them, suppress them, use them, make the public afraid of them. The Department of Damage Control has always been built for that kind of story. They are the people who show up after the superhero messes up and says, we'll handle it from here. But in a mutant story, that becomes a much sharper idea. Because mutants are not carrying a weapon. According to the people afraid of them, their body is the weapon. The difference becomes the charge. So Jean brings this particular corner of the MCU into light. And she is not arriving through a big X-Mansion speech. She's arriving through fear, through containment, through people trying to decide which bodies are acceptable and which bodies need a leash. That is way more interesting. But now we get to Doomsday, because this is where The Brand New Day can quietly become one of the most important runway movies in the whole saga. Doom is the final form of the control argument. And that's the key, because if Brand New Day is about institutions trying to decide which powerful bodies are safe or dangerous, useful or disposable, then Doomsday can scale that exact idea up. The DODC says, we need to control the dangerous ones. And then Doom says, exactly. And I am the only one strong enough to do it. And that right there, that little exchange is the whole saga move. Doom usually works best when he is not completely wrong. He sees chaos. He sees weak institutions. He sees heroes failing. He sees governments weaponizing people while pretending it is safety. Then he offers the terrifying answer, order without consent. And that is where Jean and Peter, Frank and Bruce all matter. They are smaller versions of the same question. Who gets to decide what dangerous power is for? And then Secret Wars takes that question and blows it way open. I mean, Doomsday is the control question. Secret Wars is the identity question, right? When reality breaks, when worlds collide, when the old order fails, what part of you is still true? Peter already lives with that question. His identity was erased, but his responsibility survived. Frank lives with it too. Frank Castle is almost gone, but the Punisher remains. Bruce lives with it. Bruce Banner and the Hulk have been reorganized into a version of peace that may only be management. And Jean, once again, if the leak is right, enters as someone whose mind, body, and power make her a target before anyone understands her. And that is just pure Secret Wars fuel, right? Memory, identity, hidden selves, suppressed selves, dangerous bodies, rewritten realities. This is not just a mutant setup. This is the entire foundation upon which the rest of this storytelling will go forward and be built upon. And that's why the title of this particular podcast episode matters. Sadie Sink's Jean Grey could break Spider-Man Brand New Day wide open in the best way because she can make the movie deeper. Marvel has already done bigger. Marvel has done portals, variants, timelines, gods, Eternals, Celestials, witches, 3 Spider-Men, right? All of it. Bigger is no longer enough. Jean can make the movie more intimate. She can make every power in the movie cost something from the inside. Frank's gun, Bruce's inhibitor, Peter's spider sense, Jean's telepathy, all of them become different answers to the same fear. What do I do with a dangerous part of myself? That is the question. And if Brand New Day is really asking that question, then we are dealing with someone much better than just a cameo. This is also why the Jean Grey reveal cannot function as a post-credit ad, right? Because that is the danger. If Sadie Sink walks in, uses some red psychic energy, says something mysterious, and then the movie winks at Secret Wars, that is a real missed opportunity. Fine, cool, everybody claps, YouTube thumbnails explode, but then what? The better version uses Jean as pressure. She should make Frank harder to watch. She should make Bruce less resolved. She should make Peter's mercy more expensive. She should make the DODC scarier because they're not only chasing criminals. They're chasing the bodies they do not understand. And she should make the mutant saga feel more personal before it becomes global. And that's the key. You cannot introduce mutants as just a thing of lore. The introduction of mutants has to be as a moral crisis. And this is where John Truby's idea of character opposition becomes useful. Truby talks about characters taking different approaches to the same central moral problem. And that is exactly what this movie could have and could be doing. It could have the same problem. Power is changing bodies and breaking control. Different answers. Peter tries to save. Frank tries to punish. Bruce tries to suppress. And Jean tries to reveal. And the DODC tries to contain all of it. Now every character belongs. Now the movie can have a huge cast without turning into a roll call. Because each character is a different answer to the same pressure. And that is how you keep the story from becoming soup. And Robert McKee gives us the other half of this idea. True character is revealed by choice under pressure. And that is why Jean is such a valuable pressure device. Because a telepath can create pressure nobody can punch. Frank cannot shoot his way out of being seen. Bruce cannot science his way out of being exposed. And Peter cannot quit his way out of the fear that maybe saving everyone will still leave him alone. Put Jean Grey in the room, and every lie that everyone has beneath the surface starts to sweat. And again, I'm saying this as a craft read. If the leak is wrong, okay, then we adjust, we move on. And you can all blah me to death, and I'll say, okay, I got it. We can all just pretend to be normal about it as we move forward, right? But if the leak is right, then Brand New Day has a chance to do something very smart. It can use Jean Grey as the character who makes the movie stop hiding behind the overall plot. So what does this mean for Frank being caught between Spider-Man and Jean? I think the better phrasing is this. Frank is trapped between Peter's mercy and Jean's knowledge. Peter represents the thing Frank thinks is naive. Jean represents the thing Frank cannot avoid. Peter says killing is wrong. Frank has a whole filing cabinet of arguments against that. But Jean can step past the argument and touch the reason Frank keeps making it. And this is much scarier because Frank's moral clarity and certainty depends on distance. The target is over there. The wound is back there. The mission is right here. And Jean collapses that distance. She brings the wound into the present tense. And once Frank has to feel the connection between his pain and his violence, the skull becomes less like a mission statement and more like a bandage he refuses to take off. Right there, that's the good stuff, right? And Peter needs that too, because Peter's mercy is beautiful, but mercy without cost becomes cheap. Friendly neighborhood, great power, great responsibility. Yeah, we know all the words already. Brand New Day has to make those words hurt again. Peter should want the easy answer, at least for a second or two, right? He should look at Frank and understand the appeal of ending the threat forever. He should look at Bruce and understand the appeal of suppressing the dangerous part within him. He should look at Jean and understand the terror of being seen completely. Then he has to choose Spider-Man anyway. That's the whole movie. Because Spider-Man keeps choosing mercy while knowing exactly what that mercy costs. So here is where I land. If Sadie Sink is Jean Grey, her value to Spider-Man Brand New Day is absolutely 100% pressure. And that is the perfect position for her to be in. She pressures Frank by seeing the grief underneath the punishment. She pressures Bruce by revealing the instability underneath control. She pressures Peter by making mercy emotionally unavoidable. And she pressures the MCU by making mutants a human problem before they become a saga problem. That's how this can work. That's how you can bring in the X-Men without turning Spider-Man's movie into a franchise brochure, if you will. Make Jean matter to the characters before she matters to the timeline. How this moves us towards Doomsday is this. If Brand New Day uses Jean this way, the MCU gets a street-level version of Doom's core argument. Dangerous power creates fear. Fear creates institutions, and broken institutions create the desire for one absolute ruler to make the chaos stop. What does not move us toward Doomsday is Jean Grey showing up only as just a tease. Her presence does not automatically make the saga sharper. If she only functions as an X-Men tease or a Secret Wars breadcrumb, the movie gets bigger without getting more meaningful. Her choices have to pressure Peter, Frank, and Bruce now. So the opening question was whether Jean Grey makes Spider-Man Brand New Day bigger in a way that actually helps the story. And I think the answer is this. Jean works if she makes the movie more honest. If she really is the moral X-ray. The argument starts with Frank Castle alone in a room full of targets, discovering that revenge did not heal him. It escalates toward a movie where Peter, Frank, and Bruce, and maybe the whole MCU, have to face the pain underneath their methods before Doom turns that pain into an excuse for control. Great crossover writing does not add characters for noise. It adds characters who make the same choice harder and harder and harder. Jean Grey should make Brand New Day harder to lie through. All right, that is the MCU Diaries entry for today. If you want the written version of this episode, you can find it on MarionBlakeMedia.com. If you want the deeper cut, however, the behind-the-scenes breakdown, well, you can join the Nerd Clan at jointhenerdclan.com. Of course, subscribe to wherever you're listening to this episode. Follow the show on any of the major social media platforms. Leave a rating where you're listening to this, and tell us next time what you think the pattern is.